especially when you're 1 million, right? You don't need to build 100 million. You need to get from 1 to 10. So you just want that narrow segment of customers that is sufficiently big enough so that you can build a revenue engine to get to 10 million of ARR.
Today's episode is about the journey from 1 million to 10 million in ARR. There's lots of content out there about the 0 to 1 journey, but a lot less has been written and discussed about the $1 to $10 million journey, even though this is where lots of promising companies end up dying, because too many companies try to reinvent the wheel here. Our guest today is Guillaume Jacquet, co-founder and CEO of Vasco, the revenue architecture platform for VC-backed startups to maximize their go-to-market speed and efficiency. Or in other words, everything we talk about today is what Vasco is solving for their customers. So I highly encourage you to go check them out at vasco.app. That's VASCO.app. With that, welcome Guillaume. It's wonderful to have you on. Let's start with, you told me in the context of the $1 to $10 million journey that getting to 1 million is all founder-led. Building a revenue engine from there is codified and doesn't depend on the charisma of the founder. 20% of it is magic and the other 80% is a paved road. But lots of founders want to reinvent it. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm really speaking about a context of B2B businesses. And this is an experience I had with my first company where, we started to grow. It was all founder-led. And when we started to reach that $1 million of ARR, that kind of settles the mark of product market fit, then you need to continue to grow from 1 to 10 million of dollars. And in your mind as a founder, you're like, I'm going to do exactly what I used to do in the past and trying to continue to do sales the way I did. I just have to hire a few salespeople, give them a quota, and things are going to go through. And then you realize that actually that founder magic that you brought to your own sales pipeline and revenue engine cannot be replicated. And you have to start segmenting people, functions across the customer journey, measuring a bit more who's your ICP, where do you win, how to codify your revenue engine so that you can actually build that predictable, replicable, scalable engine that all those VCs in the world keep speaking about. But that is still somewhat of an unknown for you. And there is a method behind it, right? I'm still mentioning the 20% because I think there is a huge aspect around the product, the market, a bit of luck, the timing, everything around, this intangible assets that you bring to the company. But a good 80% of reverse engineering how you grow is actually a science. There's been a ton of books and examples in the world that show how to get there. And the idea is the more you learn it, the better you're equipped to actually avoid those trial and errors and go as fast as possible from that 1 to 10 million mark.
That's fascinating. And so maybe, right, to get a bit more specific, as you said, from kind of to get to 1 million, all founder-led, afterwards you start to transition out. What changes? So what actually changes? And give me a couple of examples at the 1 million mark and how to actually think about it.
At the 1 million mark, you're alone and you potentially have, a couple of people with you in the go-to-market engine. So you do everything from lead generation to lead closing to onboarding customers to retaining customers. So when you have a fire in customer success, you jump in there. But the time you resolve that, then you have to go back and you realize that pipeline was not generated anymore. And then you start closing leads and you're like, okay, that's amazing. Let's spend time on that. And you realize that actually implementation starts to slow down. And when you have just a few customers and you want to understand and know everything about them, that's fine. But the minute you need to actually grow faster and you churn can become one of the aspects that, acts as a leaky bucket and prevents you from getting to higher grounds, then this is the time where you should start to specialize. And I think one of the things that most founders tend to forget is they tend to think that they can build carbon copy of themselves and just hire people that can be just like them, apply that founder's magic, and do everything from lead generation to lead closing to implementation to customer success. And as you do that, you're going to realize that actually it's going to be much harder to identify the right people, to get them fast to ramp up, to codify your sales engine, and to become much more predictable in how you grow. We can go in more details about that, but the key word here is to not expect as a founder to hire a carbon copy of yourself. You need to hire mini carbon copies of yourself, but very specialized at subtasks that you're doing. Lead generation, lead closing, onboarding, customer success, and later on expansion. And if you build that specialization, then you can progressively get, those teams and functions to actually replicate what you were doing and even do better because they're going to be focusing 100% of their time to do just that. So the main piece is really to understand who your customer are and then build a revenue engine where you specialize teams and function to wake up every morning and sleep every night and think about just one piece of the funnel and lift that.
There's a lot of things I think to unpack here that you mentioned. The first one is, right, you said it's incredibly crucial to have a clear understanding of who your ICP is and narrow it down very meaningfully, which is actually something that I see a lot of startups not do well at all, especially once they reach the 1 million. So how should founders think about actually narrowing down the ICP kind of once they figured out who it actually is?
This is kind of a paved road as well. And we were mentioning about, books and elements that exist out there that can give you that. I'm going to give you my two favorites methods to find it. First of all, like the story, you're a founder. You're coming in there, you have a product, you try to iterate that product with as many audiences as you can. You see what sticks, you bring sales, you fight every fight with your knives in the trenches, and then you get those customers in. And then you have that pool of customers. And around 1 million, this is where it's great because you have that pool of customers. Now it's the time to look back at all those customers that you brought in and look at the ones that are happy using your product, that have not churned, and then really see the value that you deliver. And those ones, you can build firmographics around them. Another way to say it is understand what's your ideal customer profile. What are their segments? Are they SMBs, mid-market, enterprise? What are their verticals or industries? What are they looking for? What are the tools that they're using? What is the value proposition that they buy from your software? Like a ton of checklists where you try to understand cohorts of those customers and what make them look alike. Once you've categorized those, then there is a method that I really love from Marc Roberge, who used to be the famous CRO of HubSpot, and who's built actually a ton of content and this piece of product market fits to go to market fit. And he says you should look at the customer that move extremely fast from closed won to time to value, because when they buy your product, they immediately want to use it, which means that they feel the pain. And they understand it very quickly and they are motivated to get it done, and then they don't churn. So he says, look back in your CRM and look at those customers and the time it took them, those different profiles of customers, to get to an onboarding successfully. And then, look at the ones that are happy, stayed, and didn't churn. And that's going to give you a first in on, those customers, what make them look like. Are they SMBs? Are they mid-markets? What are the tech stack they're using? What are the persona, and so on and so on. And this way you can really reverse engineer kind of, who's your ideal market that you want to start with. And once you really understand all those key attributes, then you can say, okay, let's zero in on those type of customers. They don't have to be the bigger deals. They have to be the one that see the value as fast as possible and really like to get it. They also become referenceable logos on other customers that you're going to attract that look alike in the top of the funnel. So that's the way you can look at your ICP. Another method that I really love was the superhuman method. And they were very brutal about it. They said they sent a survey to all their users and they asked them to respond to the question of how dissatisfied would you be if you could no longer use our product. And then they would really focus on the one that would be very dissatisfied, try to deeply understand that cohort of customer and refine the product around that cohort of customers and try to go after those. Especially when you're 1 million, right? You don't need to build 100 million. You need to get from 1 to 10. So you just want that narrow segment of customers that is sufficiently big enough so that you can build a revenue engine to get to 10 million of ARR. And then you change a bit the playbook and you increase your time. But in the very beginning, like really find the people who get the value.
That's kind of very much in line with a lot of the mistakes that we see that are that founders make kind of at the 1 million mark. Is to get to 1 million, you just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And a lot of folks then think, okay, now we're at 1 million, so we'll just kind of throw more resources at doing exactly the same thing and go even broader in terms of throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. Versus actually at that point taking a step back and going extremely narrow and try to rinse and repeat and get a lot better at that. So maybe kind of in line with that, right? You also had mentioned to me when we talked last time that salespeople that prospect, close, onboard, and upsell, if they do all of that, it makes it impossible to measure, to learn, and to scale. So maybe before we dive into the journey, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, if you give multiple targets to someone, then a lot of those targets are going to take a second seat. So imagine if it feels like a story you're saying, but you have a salesperson, you're asking that salesperson to build a lead generation pipeline. So basically fit themselves. And then to close that pipeline. And they need to spend time onboarding that pipeline, and then retention and expansion, they're the first call when you get there. First of all, it's going to take 18 months before that person understands all those different functions that are very different from one another, right? And also sometimes require different personality type, like onboarding and closing are really not the same personalities. But second of all, you're going to realize that the urgent is always going to take precedence against the important. So the salesperson is going to say, I need to make my months. It's going to spend time closing the pipeline. No one is onboarding the previous month's close, and you're realizing that pipeline generation goes down. So then the following months, you're like, oh, I don't have enough pipeline to work upon, so I need to focus on pipeline. And then you can't do the close one because you don't have the pipeline in order to make the month. And then you realize that you need to actually retain some of the customers that you've brought in. So now you need to focus on an entirely other part of the customer journey. And every month, instead of trying to make progress, you're going to have a different story. I couldn't close. I was generating pipeline. I couldn't generate pipeline. I was onboarding. Sorry, I couldn't retain. I was closing. And for you, it feels that, you're that infinite loop where, because there's not a clear accountability of where you need to focus, then there is no accountability at all. Well, if you really segment your customer journey and you have people who really are focused on one piece of the funnel, then they wake up every day and they sleep every night and they think about one metric and one metric only. And when that happens, the focus and the accountability makes it that systems, processes, codification happens naturally, because it's not, a month that is different than the previous one. It's really built on, focusing on lifting just a small part of the journey. So I really, really encourage to do that, especially you can't afford 18 months if you need to do everything. Like when you raise a round of financing, you most of the time have 2 years of runway. Like imagine finding out whether or not you had the right hire after 18 months. This is not possible. That's impossible.
Right. And as you said, you also can do everything all at once, right? Once you raise a round, you can't just kind of all of a sudden split up the whole customer journey. So maybe before we go, because you have a very clear point of view on where to start and how to do that process of removing yourself as a founder from the customer journey. But before we dive in there, can you maybe just very quickly unpack how you think about the customer journey and what the steps are in your mind, and then we can get into the different steps.
For SaaS businesses, it might be a bit different, but it's almost always the same. But it starts with awareness, where you have prospects that, are aware of a pain or a problem. And there's the education phase, where they're looking to find solutions, most of the time online, sometimes in other mediums. Then there's a selection phase, where the prospect really is aware of the problem, has educated herself, and now is picking vendors to solve that problem. And then there's the closing phase, where you're negotiating price and you're getting into contract and making sure that you're. And then in SaaS, this is the acquisition funnel, and you have the retention and expansion funnel, which is as important as the acquisition funnel because you have recurring revenue. So it's going to be about implementation, getting to that first value. So making sure that the software that you've used or the product that you've bought is actually delivering the value that you want as a prospect. And then there is the retention phase, where you deliver ongoing impact and your usage of the software. And finally, expansion, where your product is doing so great that actually people keep buying more from you, right? So really, acquisition, retention, and expansion. And the acquisition, it's split as kind of 4 big steps. In marketing and sales, they call it like a lead, a marketing qualified leads, a sales qualified leads, a sales accepted leads or pipeline, and then a customer one. Well, it's to reflect metrics around awareness, education, selection, and closing.
It makes a lot of sense. And so now, right, as a founder, you have to start removing yourself kind of step by step across the customer journey. once it's not all founder-led anymore. Where, from your point of view, where do I start and why?
So in my point of view, and this is kind of a strong point of view I have, the first parts where you need to start removing yourself is customer success. Making sure that those customers you fought so hard to bring on board, they are retained, they love you, you continue to generate word of mouth, you have referenceable logos, and they continue using your product or services. So you really want to make sure, as you're going to be progressively spending more attention on your acquisition funnel, making sure that retention is taken care of. So I would really recommend to hiring customer success and get someone that's going to make sure that, those customers are here. And you're still going to be a bit involved in there right here and there, but at least you're going to have someone waking up every morning and sleeping every night and surfacing all the issues and being there for customers as you go. Once you make sure that, churn is taken care of and customer happiness is taken care of, then you can move your attention to the other piece.
Which is a little bit counterintuitive, right? Because if you reach 1 million, you raise a round, you just think about getting to 3 next and then to 10 and beyond. And so most people that I see, they actually then start to throw everything at hiring kind of top of funnel, or folks that help with top of funnel, versus actually making sure that it isn't a leaky bucket.
And when you're a startup, especially $1 to $1 million, like your existing logos are the best way for you to build case studies, to build word of mouth, to get references, to also, get everything. They want to speak about your brand. They believed in you. How do you want to build a marketing effort on customers that hate you, right? So those customers, making sure that there's someone that really makes sure that they're the most important thing in the world. I think it's the first hire you should be doing. Otherwise, you'd be constantly thrown back into actually solving fires and trying to prevent churn at the last minute. And you're in VC, right? We understand the math of churn, right? You can acquire many customers, but if it's a leaky bucket and you're not able to onboard them and retain them afterwards, the math don't work anymore. So this is the first piece of the equation that you really need to nail.
No, I 100% agree. At what point, or because this is a bit of a step-by-step process. So you bring someone in customer success, you obviously have to get that person up and running. At what point, kind of within customer success, are there certain metrics or things to look out for when I could say, okay, customer success now doesn't require my attention anymore. I can now move on to the next step of removing myself from kind of the next stage of the funnel.
And that's kind of the method, by the way. You're everywhere at the beginning of the company. And now you're trying to remove yourself function by function across the customer journey so that it depends less on you and therefore so that it can scale. So now we've talked about the right side of the bow tie, which is like the customer success piece. Then the second counterintuitive piece is people are going to run math based on, I need to do X amount of ARR. Therefore, I should hire 3 sales reps who are going to do Y each, and it's going to get me there, right? Thinking that those salespeople, they're going to do everything from lead generation to lead closing. What I've learned with my previous experiences and company is that if you have a predictable pipeline generation, it solves all the problem in the world in the rest of the engine. If you can build predictable pipeline, then it means that you can constantly be in the face of your prospects and bring more and more of them. And it's okay if you're not the best at closing, you're still gonna get amazing. So removing yourself from that equation. And the idea is then trying to lift really lead generation. So now you have that ICP. So you're given a gift to the person lead generation. You know exactly who are the target audience that you want to go after, right? And if you can hire and specialize, then you're going to be obviously like co-piloting this with that person. But you want to find the messaging, the channels in which you're able to put your product in front of a similar type of ICP that you're looking after. So really dedicating your time into building that pipeline generation in a predictable way is going to solve a lot of issues, especially because right after then, this is when you hire your first AEs. And those AEs now, they're fed with a ton of pipeline that they can work with. So they can really, really make sure that they focus on bringing that qualified pipelines into closing and you're sure that when you hire them, they have enough to be fed.
I see a lot of folks trying to hire kind of full stack reps, right? To do anything from prospecting to closing. Why is that the wrong approach? Why do you you've partially alluded it, but why do you so strongly disagree with doing that versus hiring a specialist for the top of funnel?
To me, it's especially in the beginning also. Then, when you grow, it's okay to have your sales rep source just a small piece of the pipeline. But in the beginning, if you give 2 goals to the person in sales and you say pipeline generation and pipeline closing, 1 month they're going to be focusing on closing and pipeline is going to go down. Second month, they're going to be focusing on trying to do pipeline generation, and then closing is going to go down. And you never get that predictability because you have 2 metrics. So there's not a single accountability on a single metric. And where you're going to try to surface this, they're going to say, well, I had to go from there to there. And also it's a different mindset to do pipeline generation and to do pipeline closing. Pipeline generation is about targeting and building the right messages, iterating with, a ton of outreach, finding the right marketing content to actually serve so that you can deliver on the top of the funnel. It's a mindset of people who are much more sequential in the tasks than they do. While pipeline closing, of course, there is a bit of a science behind it, but it's much more people who are going to take those, prospects that are warm in the pipeline, and there is a swag that is much more required of someone that can really understand the negotiation of pricing, navigating multiple stakeholders, and really building that relationship with the prospect to go there. So it's also 2 different skill sets. If you want to lift pipeline generation and you have people who do both, then 1 month they're going to focus on one thing and the second month the other thing, and therefore you're going to get those yo-yos that you never want. And also you'll never be able to codify because they're going to jump to what's urgent and they never think about actually, replicating the thing that worked and stopping the thing that didn't.
Makes a lot of sense. Sticking to the top of funnel for another second, you also mentioned the importance of understanding the difference between inbound channels, outbound channels, and indirect channels. Why is that important this early on, and if so, why?
Something I'd like to touch on as well, going into that question, is that your ICP is going to dictate what go-to-market motion works for your business. Final point. If you're telling me that your ICP is, I'm selling something for $100 per month, and it's for the SMB market, then you don't put an account-based marketing motion with a ton of field reps that are doing heavy lifting in order to get those customers, because you'll never get there, right? You'll never get the volume that you need, and it's never going to be cost efficient. On the other side, if you're selling to Fortune 500 companies, like forget about PLG motion, right? Those people, they buy the service as much as they buy the product, and they require heavy lifting onboarding and, to be walked through the process with someone. So your ICP, and especially the segment of customer you're targeting, is going to tell you what go-to-market motion can or cannot work. If you're very, very on the left side, so smaller annual contract value, then it's more of a PLG motion with potentially a bit of community and inbound. If you start to get into the 10 to 50,000, then you can get inbound marketing plus a bit of SDR, plus potentially a bit of SDRs on the outbound side, so BDR, and people closing remotely. If you're between 50 to 150, then maybe it might be worth to do a bit of account-based marketing and also to do a bit of field sales, right? But it's back to the science. Tell me what is the size of your customers, and I'll tell you what go-to-market motion you can put in place. So now, let's say you've understood, and let's pick the 10 to 50K per year annual contract value. So you have a bit of room to play.
Maybe before we get there, right? Everyone always says we're a young startup, we're selling small contracts, we're on the pricing, we're going to over time sell much larger contracts. What do you say to that versus sticking to kind of where you are in the moment?
I mean, it's a natural transition for companies to move upstream, but let's remember where you're at right now. You have a brand in a certain segment in which you picked an ICP. So if you're starting to say, well, yeah, but we're going to send larger contract afterwards, you're already trying to preempt the future, You don't want to build a go-to-market motion that's going to get you to 50 million of AR if you don't have yet 10 million of AR. You're going to corrupt the product because you're going to sell to people that have completely different needs than the ones that you're currently selling at. So when it comes to marketing messages, you're also going to have two marketing messages that are completely unrelated to one another because you don't sell the same kind of things to companies that are, 50 plus than companies that are 10. So by trying to preempt your move to upstream, you're defocusing on actually making it work right now for your current audience on what your product needs to deliver. And if you pick your ICP well enough, you should have enough leeway to get to 10 million. So I would really recommend to stick to what you have now. You can still, think about a bit of expansion that is going to happen with the natural, segment of product that they're going to buy from you. But thinking you're going to triple your ACV because you're going to move upstream and it's going to change everything in the next 2 years, I think it's putting a lot of technical debt on the future if you do that.
Yeah, fully agree. So you're going to jump into kind of how the go-to-market motion at the ICP now, or how the ICP now defines the go-to-market motion.
If you're between 10 to 50, then you can have a bit of inbound, of course. But it's kind of enough also to start segmenting and have potentially a bit of inbound SDR. So segmenting marketing and inbound SDR, and then have AEs who take those leads from marketing that have been qualified and potentially a bit nurtured by those inbound SDR to pipeline to those AEs, and then send to implementation and thereafter customer success. So that's a motion where the more you throw humans at the motion, the more your ACV needs to be big because it's going to cost you more and the velocity is going to be a bit slower than if you're pure PLG and people discover you online and they buy your product, they never talk to someone, they put their credit card and there they go. Here you can throw that. So this is kind of a motion that would work. Another motion would be, and then for inbound, the idea is find the channels on which your ICP are. Are they on LinkedIn? Are they on TikTok? Do they consume content? What is top of mind for them? When you're in communities and chats, what are they discussing about? What is their pain point? It comes down again, the importance of understanding your ICP because your entire content and medium strategy is going to be based on who are they and where are they and what do they want to hear about and what is their pain point. So your marketing strategy is going to love you if you've really nailed down your ICP to go after. Again, from 1 to 10, then 10 and after is going to be different. And you can have also an outbound kind of motion with BDR in-house that are looking at signals and trying to craft outbound messaging. Outbound has been a bit more complicated in the past couple of years, but outbound still works if you do it very, very well, if you provide value, and if you have intent. So that's an example. And outbound is just finding profiles of your ICP in your target market and trying to reach out to them proactively rather than receiving leads on your website.
That makes a lot of sense. It also mentioned that if you can in any way, you should split inbound and outbound SDRs. Why is that?
Well, it comes again on accountability. It's much easier to take a qualified lead, an MQL, that came to your website, consume content, raise their hand and said, I'm interested in your product, and convert them into qualified pipeline to a sales rep, right? It's much harder to build a list of 100 prospects, draft messages, trying to attempt to reach out to them 7 times, and then, get through the blockers, rejections, and things like that. And then finally surface a pain point through the discovery process, create intent, and move that to pipeline generation. So if you don't specialize, first of all, the performance of your SDRs are going to depend on the amount of inbound lead that they receive. So you remove accountability. Second of all, your SDRs are going to focus on whatever is easier to convert. So they're going to focus on inbound, and you're never going to lift outbound. While if you have a bit more senior SDRs that become business BDR at this point, that are waking up every morning and sleeping up every night, trying to really, really lift the messaging, the craft, and so on that channel, you're going to see much better results than if they're spread in 2 things, on which one of them is much easier than the next one. And by the way, the fun piece is you can start building career trails. You can start to have inbound SDR, you train them, and then you train them on reactivation of some closed lost opportunity. And then boom, when they graduate, you put them into BDR. So, every 9 to 12 months, they kind of fill their career progression, but they're already pre-trained on the product, the market, the audience, and so on. So they're much better. And then once they, deliver on this, then they can move to become an AE, and you create like tenure of your people inside the organization with career path.
That makes a lot of sense. So now, right, for the first step was remove yourself from customer success. Second step is remove yourself from the top of the funnel, the pipeline generation. At what point do I now worry about kind of moving to the next step of removing myself? What are kind of clear signals that step 2 is kind of a checkbox behind it, and I can now move on to the next step?
When you have, for a couple of quarters, when you have predictable pipeline generation. So you're getting pipeline regularly on a method that you understand from, whatever channel or, medium you've chosen to be there, but you're confident that by replicating kind of the same steps and improving them, you're going to generate that predictable pipeline. This is where you can start hiring an AE or potentially promoting an SDR to AE. That's also, something that's doable. In the meantime, you will act still as the expert in the product, so you can be still a bit the sales engineer, but this is where the craft of a salesperson really comes in. They're going to learn about your market, your industry, but they're already incredible at pricing negotiation, building rapport, mirroring customer needs, understanding pain points, navigating stakeholders. Like there is a science behind this pipeline to closed one process. It requires a little less product knowledge. And if you need someone who has a ton of product knowledge, then you as the founder, you act as the sales engineer. It requires much more skill sets of salespeople that you can acquire more easily. But what they need, those people, is leads that they can work through. If you come and hire them and there's no need to work through that, then you're just hiring them and they're just doing nothing. So right now you can guarantee them a certain amount of leads, which means you can also get better people because they feel that they're going to be set up for success. And you're focusing them on really bringing that skill set to bringing new customers in.
We're basically saying with that you're focusing on closing as well as the next step. What I do after, or what are kind of signals within closing that I can also put a checkbox behind it now and then move on to the next step?
The cool thing is that there's benchmarks that can really help you. And if you want, there's a ton available online. There are a ton available on Vasco actually also, if anyone's interested. But they are benchmarks that kind of tell you for a certain size of customer what good looks like. So you can really anchor yourself on those benchmarks. It's actually super useful because you can also refer to those benchmarks in board meetings to your investors, saying, we're within those benchmarks, therefore we're finding the formula. So typically it's between close rate between 20 to 30%. But if you're in a much higher kind of ACV, it's okay to have a bit lower close rate. Or if you're in smaller annual contract value deal size, then you need a bit higher close rates. But it typically ranges between 20 to 30%. Yeah. When you have that kind of close rate, it means that the pipeline you're bringing has a pain that is urgent enough, and you've built the skill set internally and codified the sales to actually transform that pipeline into closed one. And that becomes a ton of fun. Because now, as the founder, finally, you remove yourself from the go-to-market engine and you play the orchestra. And you start zeroing on, we have a problem here, and then you zoom in there, but you know that the rest is being taken care of. And then you come back up. You make sure transitions are amazing. You make sure you train the people, and you make sure then you bring more people in order to scale the engine. But you're not in the weeds trying to make the numbers. You're playing the orchestra. And I really wish it for anyone, in that phase, because it feels like surfing, it feels like there's that big wave that is just, bringing you and accelerating the speed for you, and you're just like riding it, and it's a ton of fun.
One of the things I really like about your framework is kind of having a very clear process and methodology around it. But from an investor's point of view, also allows you to very much focus everyone's attention on what step you're actually working on. And you have very clear metrics around what success means, and you can typically give a time window within which that kind of you want to achieve success at that stage to then move on to the next one. Because without doing it, you just, as you said, you're so all over the process everywhere that it's incredibly hard to actually upgrade something in a more sustainable way versus just kind of these one-off fixes that won't help you to actually get to having a much more sophisticated go-to-market engine that you need to actually get to 10 million.
For me, it touches really the notion of noise, but against signal. When everyone is doing a bit of everything and it feels like a bit chaotic, when you ask a clear question, you always find yourself receiving or giving anecdotal feedback. When you're building an engine, you find yourself being able to provide extremely tangible answers with metrics to those clear questions. Why did we miss the number this month? We brought X amount of pipeline, but close rates were not 25, they were 20%. We think it's because we generated too many leads from that channels that convert less. Therefore, we're going to stop doing that channels and we're going to reinforce resources on that. Like the level of trust you're giving to your investors when you say that, rather than, yeah, we have a couple of big deals, but maybe they're going to come through and you're going to depend on, some of those enormous wells that supposedly you're going to land at some point, and that anyway, there's no way for you to get that in a replicable manner. Like it feels like, you're gasfighting it a little bit. Well, when you're building that engine, you know exactly where the problem lies and you can dedicate 100% of your focus in order to fix that. The other trust too is your founder. They understand that not everything is going to be perfect, but if you tell them, we've not made the number, but look, for that ICP, that, and that, for that channel, we were able to grow pipeline by 30% month over month. So now we need to figure out close rates to make sure that we transform that pipeline into that. But we found a way to accelerate pipeline generation for a certain type of customers. Like for a VC, they say, okay, they're figuring out the formula. While on the first answer, they're like, I'm wondering if they're running in other directions and anyone is actually understanding what's happening within the funnel.
The last few steps that we haven't touched upon yet is, and what he had told me is, once you kind of figure out closing, then you split implementation and retention. So you actually split up kind of what do you through customer success in the first step. Maybe just tell me a little bit more about that as well.
In the very beginning, you started with customer success. You want to have kind of that process where they get to value and then they retain, and it's okay to have generals. But the last piece is, if you really, really want to build predictability, increasing the time to first value or decreasing the time to first value, like making it as fast as possible, is the best way to accelerate your revenue engine and to make sure that you're not having lagging indicator of churn afterwards. So it's the same thing, like implementation. It's a different kind of skill set a little bit than retention. Implementation, you're hands-on with the customer to deliver your product or services and get to the impact or the value. After that, it's more recurring impact, regular touch base, making sure you transform those customers into ambassadors. But it's two different mandates. One is kind of SWAT team in there, make sure we get there as fast as possible. The other one is more nurturing a relationship, right? And if you split those, then again, you're going to have profiles of people who wake up every morning, sleep every night, and think about, how do we optimize this close one to I get the value? And if they spend their days doing this, then they're going to be a process, codification, content, and everything in order to optimize for this. While the other piece will make sure that they find leading indicator of health score, preventing churn, usage of the product, nurturing tactics, and so on and so on. That are just a different necessity because they're a different stage in the customer journey.
Makes a lot of sense. And then, kind of as a last piece, you also said in the very end, that's when you start to really focus on expansion with existing customers as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of the final play. So once you split implementation, customer success into implementation and CS, I encourage to put CS on a net revenue retention kind of quota to make sure that, they're also in charge of expansion and retention and kind of the net of the two. But at one point, you're going to realize that the more you grow your customer base and your ARR, the more churn becomes pugnative. And the company who can really grow super fast are the company who have net revenue retention above 100%. ideally 120, 140. So that actually 30%, 40% of your net new revenue comes from your existing customer. That is enormous versus having to compensate through the acquisition funnel by your revenue shrinking because of churn and a lack of expansion. So in the same essence of specialization, customer retention and customer upsell is a different skill set. Also, there are ones that are extremely incredible in nurturing, creating, value for the customers, being there for them, solving their problems, being there really like their co-pilot, helping them succeed using the product. But it's another kind of skill set to be able to position that upsell, right? It has a transactional component to it. It's another skill set. It's another personality type. And that's my experience is for a long period of time, we kept those there. And our best retention specialists couldn't place any upsell. And our best upsellers, they didn't give the level of care we wished our customer would get. And splitting those two into, make sure that you have one that is clearly in charge of retention and the other one that is clearly in charge of surfacing upsell opportunity. Of course, they can work as a team, but that's there. And that's going to get you, also beyond the 10 million of ARR, because you'll be able to rely on your existing customer base as you build then new go-to-market motion to continue to see that inflection of growth as you build the next foundation of the future. So, but it's toward the end. Figure out, first of all, retention, then acquisition, and then expansion.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, right? You put it well when you had told me that it costs 5 times less to grow existing customers than to acquire new ones.
100%.
Yeah. So this is actually a good segue to kind of the last very brief topic I wanted to touch upon, right? Because our focus is on the 1 to 10. So we're getting towards the tail end. We're starting to reach the 10 or 12 or whatever it ends up being. So now I'm on my road to 50. Every hill gets bigger on the other side. What's the first thing I need to think about once I kind of get to roughly 10 as I'm now on my road to 50?
So now you've got to, sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's 12. Let's put it at 10, right? Because it's easy. You win for a certain ICP. You think your market is enormous, but in reality, you win for a certain ICP of a certain customer profile within a certain type of channel. And you're mainly targeting active buyers, right? So you don't know why, but most of the time between 8 to 12, the thing you used to do in the past, they don't work anymore. Or they don't work as great anymore. Or any incremental dollar that you're putting in there doesn't yield to the same kind of ROI and speed and efficiency. There's declining ROI of the marketing efforts and so on. It's because you're only, most of the time, targeting the active buyers on a certain channel for a certain ICP. And now you need to expand. So there are 2 ways you get from that 10 to 50 to then 100. The first one is you start increasing your real total addressable market and you find a second ICP, a third ICP. It can be a geography, it can be a segment, it can be another vertical, it can be another industry. But you start to do that again. And when you do that again, you start again from scratch. Yeah. So don't think that because you have go-to-market fits on one motion, you're going to get a go-to-market fit on the second motion. So you're going to have to start again by making sure your customers love you and finding those early customers, then building a pipeline of predictable leads, then closing them, and so on and so on. So you're going to run a few bets that are going to increase your total addressable market, which is going to get you to the next phase. And the second piece is you're going to have to target more than just the active buyers. So it's going to be investment more toward the middle of the funnel, where you can start talking about building a brand, making sure that you educate a little bit the markets, and those kind of 3 to 5% active buyers. Now you're also in the mind of the people who are not yet there in the education phase, but they feel that they have a pain point, and you're building content and you're building outreach to serve them. So you're getting to that same ICP, but you're getting them earlier within their own customer journey.
Taking a step back, and you've done this journey more than once, what were some of the biggest learnings or kind of failures you had yourself along the way as you tried to figure this out for yourself?
So first of all, like the biggest learning was to learn that model. Like the first year we applied, let me circle back. With my first company, we did all the mistakes in the world in the beginning. And we did the thing where we thought that just hire sales rep and sales will come. We did the thing where we're like, okay, it shouldn't be that hard to do lead generation. Let's send a couple of emails and 3 social media posts and lead will come. And nothing came. And we came back to the trenches with the co-founders and we refused to let it go. And we found a way to still get to the next round of financing and sign a few deals that just got us there. But then we went through what I've explained here and started to read science, the growth acceleration formula from Marco Berge and other books, frameworks. There's winning by design as well with revenue architecture and so on. And as we started to implement one by one those metrics, we like the first year pipeline generation grew 400% year over year on one channel. So that was like enormous. And then we saw close rate continue and so on. So I wished I knew that earlier because I would have saved probably 2 to 3 years of pain cave, really pain cave, going through that. And the board meetings, they just changed because they were seeing the curves pipeline that was generated much quicker toward the funnel. And that trust was built that something was cooking, something was happening. The thing I wished I knew as well is that we're operating a machine, but this machine is operated by themselves humans. And for me, talent density is something I really believe in. And investing earlier in recruitment is something that is actually so useful because as you are on a short time frame with not a lot of bandwidth, you've hired someone and that person doesn't quite work out. And you need to let that person go. But you're like, man, what are we going to do for those targets of next quarter? What am I going to say to my investors? Should I just wait a little bit more? Now I need to come back and I need to find again pipeline and talents. I need to go back in recruiting modes while doing the job of the person. And then you don't do it. And you don't know why, but actually quality goes down. And your best talent also are frustrated because you're allowing mediocre talents inside your organization. So for me, like the thing I'm really recommending is to build your own little recruiting agency, having potentially someone who's dedicated in recruiting early on in your journey to make sure you have constantly an amazing pipeline of talents that can be there. So that every step you unlock, kind of a new phase, then you have talents that are already, there to join you. You have a structured sales process. You know the kind of person who work for your organization, the ones that don't. You create a delightful onboarding experience. And most importantly, when you have a tough decision to make, you make that decision rather than, let's wait again a couple of quarters. So, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Maybe just to take on that point for a second and make it quite tactical. But it's very hard to carve out time for recruiting, especially if you don't need to hire for that role yet. What does work for you in terms of recruiting? Because you can spend all your day networking without it actually leading to anything. So how do you think about recruiting well ahead of, and how do you actually do it when you have very limited time, well ahead of when you actually need to hire for that role?
Yeah, well, coming back to the customer journey, there is a employee journey as well. And that employee journey this one is mostly going to be on the acquisition side. But the thing that's going to take you the most of your time is to building the job profiles, reaching out to people, building those LinkedIn advertising campaigns, trying to find the companies that you think talented are amazing in, trying to identify the right profile, find the right profile. That can be outsourced to a talented individual who has experience in talent acquisition, human resources. You're going to still be interviewing. You're going to still be there to pick the right candidates. You're going to still be there to sell the story. But maybe the pipeline acquisition of talent is something that takes 80% of the time, and then you can build a predictable system for it. And the best recruiter, then they also have the ability to flex on the other side of the funnel. And then they help you with, did that candidate work? And what are the personality traits that we can now understand a leading indicator of success of that person. And now let's make it part of the interview process to validate for those personality traits like coachability, energy, skill set in various experience in various companies, skill set in various parts of sales and so on.
Now, right, kind of going back to the journey again, the customer journey, and figuring out the individual parts. What's been the hardest part for you to know or figure out, kind of on that 1 to 10 journey, and why?
I will answer differently. There wasn't one that was harder than the other. What is hard is you're building that manufacturing of growth, and there is always one thing that doesn't go as planned. So you find yourself constantly like, now it's working here, boom, you jump on the other thing. Now it's working here, boom, you jump on the other thing. Now you've reached scale, so you just need to jump back on, marketing because you need to press more in lead generation or things like that. So it's more kind of the hardest thing is, it's amazing because you feel that it's not all depending on you and it's accelerating. But as it's accelerating, like this is where the founder needs to make sure that inject, extract, inject, extract, inject, extract. And because you're specializing, you're creating mini silos. You need to make sure that the handoff are phenomenal because the weak spots are always on the handoff. Marketing handing off to SDR, SDR handing off to sales. If you have one weak spot, it's going to be exploited and you're going to have leakage. So you need to really you're less in the doing, you're more in the system building. You're kind of an engineer in terms of the mindset. And it's a term I'm taking from actually both Aaron Ross and Mark Auberge, who both had engineering background and build incredible, systems to scale businesses. But you have to be that engineer, and the more your system grows, the more it magnifies leakages in other parts. Yeah. Does that make sense?
100%. So maybe let's move on to just a few more quick questions. What popular advice that is often given to startup founders and operators do you yourself disagree with, and why?
I'm sometimes VCs, they do a lot of pattern recognition. So they see things that work, and therefore they also a bit system thinkers. And if they see a sample size of things that work enough, then they will recommend to all companies to implement those. And it was a popular time to be in PLG. And then now everybody needed to have a PLG motion. Reality, if you sell 100K plus deals, don't do a PLG motion, or at least don't start with it, If, there was the notion of you need to be a point-based solution and solve one product, narrow. And then you're seeing company like HubSpot and ClickUp who just won because they're the platform, and maybe they're not the best at each and every subparts, but the platform aggregation is the best. So my advice to you is, I've talked about the 80% of science, but remember your 20% of the thing that you know that no one else does. Like the special culture you're bringing, the knowledge that you have on the market that no one has, the feeling that your customers are giving you when you speak to them, like speaking to the users is all the, keep talking to your users every time through any phases of the journey. And then, it's okay sometimes to not do what the others are doing because you know something special about your industry or what you're doing or your differentiation, because in the end, it's not 100% science. There's that 20% of the thing that makes you special, and that's going to make you win. And double down on that part and trust yourself.
100%.
But don't kill your business by trying to reinvent the world on the 80% rest.
100%. Which is probably a partial answer to the next question, but this one is for someone at the very start. So what's a piece of advice you give to someone who is thinking about starting a company or has just started one, that doesn't worry about the 1 to 10 yet?
Do they have a product, and are they going to market, or they don't?
They're just thinking about starting a company, or they've just started one. Really, so the very early days.
I'm gonna steal Y Combinator kind of tagline: build something that people want. I know it sounds very easy, but build something that I hear a lot of people want. And it's easy to get trapped into, I've read case studies, I know everything about X, Y, Z. I'm amazing at building pitch deck, and I do a ton of things like a wizard. Then you get the first customers that come in that destroys your product or your idea. And this is the first kind of learning mechanism that you're going to get. So really speak to your users, learn how to do user interviews that are not confirmation bias to what you want to hear. And really based on those very concrete use cases, try to build something that people want. Find your first cohort of customers, listen to what they have to say, their pain, not their solution, and then try to iterate based on that. I've talked about everything about scaling a business, but between 0 to 1, it's kind of the other way around, is do things that don't scale and talk to your users. And the day they start to really love you, by the way, it's always better to have 100 customers that really love you, or 10, depending on your customer size, and 1,000 of customers that are meh, that's okay. So that's that. And once you get to that 1 million kind of mark, it can change. And this is where you need to be more systematic about growth.
Yeah, 100%. Now, the last question, right? We've talked about a lot about the shortcomings of us VCs. But as a VC myself, I'm always kind of curious to ask and learn from others' experience. What's the most impactful thing an investor has done for you or any business you've been involved with to date?
I have great relationship with the investor I have in the company, and they've been a tremendous help. I'm lucky it's my second company, so also I had the luxury of being able to work with the people I want to work with. So I'm very lucky about that. But they give me 3 things. First, when you have VC money, you can accelerate your growth, your roadmap. So they're giving you their trust with their money, and you can acquire better talent. Especially on the engineering side at the beginning. So to build a great product, you need great engineers and great designers and so on. And that is a catalyst in getting the talent that gets you there. The second piece that VC give you is also, for the greatest one, a brand. The instant credibility that because you're backed by X, then you're gonna get immediate credibility when you try to win a deal or close a candidate or something like that. So the brand is there. And then the relationship with your investor, if you have the right one, or if they have a platform, they can make phenomenal intros. They can act as a sounding board. As you have your hands on the wheel and you're in the trenches, sometimes the best one, they help you extract from your day to day and see the forest and not just the sum of the trees. And that is, extremely useful.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It's nice to
build that relationship, because most of the time funders, they're afraid of coming with bad news. But if you feel that, if VC feels that they're being gaslighted or pitched every time, then they don't run into bad news and tell them. And then you build that trust, and then you get the real advice. And when you have good news, then they're going to trust you. So it's something as a founder you also need to work on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's partially why we only lead the very first round and we don't lead the next round, which is another forcing function or kind of great way for people to actually come to you a lot more, because they know you're just not going to lead the next round, and so they don't have to sell you on their company anymore. But as I said, it's nice to end on a high note from a VC's perspective. This was absolutely phenomenal. So thank you very much for joining me and knowing a lot today.
Thank you so much for having me.